After 7, hello again and thanks for staying with us. So the independent panel that's looking into the Phala Phala farm robbery is expected to hand over its report to the National Assembly Speaker today. That report will determine whether President Cyril Ramaphosa should in fact face any kind of impeachment proceedings for his role in the saga. The panel, which is headed by retired Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, was given 30 days to complete its work, and you might remember asked for an extension. Let's get you a sense of what we know now and what the way forward possibly looks like. Erin Bates is our reporter. She is live to us now from our studios in Randburg. Erin, great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And there's so much to be said around what's taken place, and perhaps let's just jog our memories around how we got here to begin with. It was Arthur Fraser unexpectedly releasing a statement, I think it was on Twitter, making all kinds of allegations against the president. He says this was in the interest of justice, but given his role and politics, of course, many other people have read all kinds of things into that. What did he say in that statement?
So the 48-page statement includes his own version of what happened in Phala Phala, or at Phala Phala, in March 2020. And then there are attachments. So he includes a map, he includes photographs, he includes the ID documents of the suspects who were pursued into Namibia, and then also text messages. And all of this he uses to justify his take on the robbery and what followed significantly, and the allegation that the president was involved in crimes such as money laundering, and also endorsing the unlawful pursuit of those robbers and allegedly paying them hush money. So you're right, that was the trigger. And then from there, of course, the sort of political storm started to swirl. The ATM lodged a complaint in terms of Section 89 of the Constitution. That's around the impeachment of the president on 3 grounds. It's either law-breaking or serious misconduct or the incapacity to do the job. And then the panel was established. There were about 17 people who were put forward by political parties to be on the panel. Ultimately, 3 were chosen by MPs, and the Speaker then initiated that process. They had 30 days, as you said. They asked for a little bit more time, considering the nature and the sensitivity and the depth of what they were looking into. And today, in under 3 hours, that report from Ngcobo and his colleagues will be handed over to Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula.
Right, and we'll speak about what that moment actually represents and whether or not we might be able to actually read into what's in the report, if at all, later on today. But before we get there, it's important to also understand the work of this panel itself. I mean, it's not a prosecutorial body at all, right? It was meant to just, go through evidence on paper or submissions on paper to look into whether or not the president does have a case to answer.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you raised that, because it's important to remember that the full panel, so it's Ngcobo, Thokozile Masipa, former judge, and then Advocate Mahlape Selo, so all legal minds, which gives it that kind of flavor of the sort of judicial, but they're only working on paper submission. That includes input from MPs. Likely the ATM has provided Fraser's statement and those attachments, and then the president's response. But they don't go scouting. It's not like the Hawks, who we heard yesterday, have almost 70 statements now. They haven't gone subpoenaing people to come and tell them what's what. They're simply going on what's before them, and that may well limit what they can actually find. What they have to do is, in terms of those 3 provisions in Section 89, determine if there's sufficient evidence to find an impeachment vote should go ahead. And then MPs have to look through that. They'll deliberate on the 6th of December, which is next Tuesday, and then choose a way forward. And if they choose a way forward in terms of actually instituting an impeachment process, we're not at a vote yet.
Right.
Then we get to establishing a committee. The committee can subpoena witnesses and move through that process and start scouting for information, and then file a report, and then MPs would then go and vote on a report if the report said, yes, we think an impeachment process should actually come down to a final vote.
You spoke about a political storm that this has unleashed. Of course, the opposition jumping onto this, as one would expect. What, on the main, have they had to say? We know the ATM, for instance, is looking for one outcome and one outcome only, and has threatened to go to court if they don't get that outcome.
Yes, they're already sharpening their knives in terms of a possible review of the report if they find it unsatisfactory. The DA, a little bit more conservative. They're saying, look, if we don't get our answer, we have played ball in terms of this process. You can't want the process and then throw it out the window when it doesn't suit you. So the DA will be pushing for an ad hoc committee, which is a different kind of committee, but it can also subpoena witnesses if Ngcobo and his colleagues decide, actually, we don't think there's sufficient evidence based on what's before us to recommend impeachment go ahead. You say, of course, it has stirred up the opposition, but it has also stirred up people within the ANC.
Absolutely, and that's important because we do know that there's this conference coming up next month. Already, in fact, I think you've already mentioned this in your package. No matter how the panel finds, and no matter what the panel finds, this is certainly something that's going to be latched on by some of the president's enemies within the governing party.
Yes, and we already saw that, I think it was about 2 weeks ago at the NEC meeting, where we had the likes of our Minister of Traditional Affairs recommending or urging that the president step aside. We've had that from several people within the ANC, high up in its ranks, and it is political collateral for those who are saying, this is Mr. Cleanup, this is Mr. Anti-Corruption, and yet here we have the Phala Phala scandal. He hasn't really come clean. We don't know the full facts, and it's simply not okay for him to be leading the party.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about what exactly is happening at 10 o'clock, at least what we know so far. In a statement that the National Assembly Speaker released, Sandile Ngcobo said that he believes that it's in the public interest, or that this handover ceremony should be public in and of itself. But we don't really know if we're going to be able to see the report today, do we?
We don't, but of course if we don't see it, that's going to create a huge outcry. And it might not be strategic. I mean, Ngcobo, as you say, he's well known as being a really sort of straight shooter in terms of being a jurist, a former Chief Justice. You know, you don't really get higher than that. And they've worked, and they are obliged to work in terms of Section 89 of the Constitution and the rules around the panel with impartiality, no fear, favour or prejudice, to apply their minds to the facts before them. And so he's underlined that sort of need for transparency and for candour with the public on what they find. So it'll go to MPs. Quite likely it will be released to the public. If not, I'm sure it will make its way into the public. And then it's a matter of working through what the report actually says. But in terms of 10 o'clock itself, as the clock ticks, and we all wait for that moment, don't expect too much. It's going to be a bit of a photo op. It's going to be a bit of pomp and ceremony with Ngcobo handing over that all-important document. But it's not going to be a full-on press junket with questions, answers, getting into the meat of things. That's up to us, opening up those pages and having a look at what's inside.
A job you do very well. Erin Bates, thanks very much indeed for helping us once again, reminding us how we got here and what the way forward might look like. Erin Bates, of course, is our reporter here on Newzroom Afrika.